Dear FKCCI members, dear partner, dear friend, as the chairman of the French-Korean Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I'm very glad to launch this new season of the FKCCI after the summer break with our traditional economic forecast. I'm equally delighted to see that you are very faithful to this event, as you are more than 110 with us today through this webinar. It is true that we were initially hoping being able to resume our physical event from this month, but the reality is different, as we have now to face a second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, once again, we have been forced to adapt ourselves in our business as in our personal life, following the measure decided by the Korean government. Those measures have been eased a little bit, no later than yesterday night, following the reduction to less than 200 positive cases a day. Those numbers, compared to the one of other countries, remind us how different are the political, social reaction to this crisis, and how this crisis, in terms of economic aspect, by nature, is different from the other. In this context, as Korea in general, our business community has shown resilience in order to maintain its business continuity, but as well exchanges and cooperation with France. Be for sure an asset once the situation will be normalized to rebound strongly together, especially if we do consider that the very ambitious relaunch plans from our two countries are organized around the same three topics: innovation, decarbonized economy, and welfare. Korea has undeniably managed quite well the sanitary aspect of the crisis and remained quite steady, economically speaking, compared to many other OECD countries. But on a mid and long term, there is still many factors of uncertainty which might affect the Korean economy that we shall take into consideration in our forecast. To do that, I'm very glad to be joined today by our experts from different institutions. First, French ambassador in Korea, Mr. Philippe LEFORT, will introduce the session, followed by Mr. Hyun-Do KANG, Deputy Commissioner of the Yellow Sea Free Economic Zone, YESFEZ, our partner today for this event. Then our panelist will be Mr. Il-Young Park, Director of Development Bureau of the Ministry of Economy and Finance, Mr. Michel DROBNIAK, Head of Economic Department at the French Embassy in Korea, Mr. Suktae, Chief Korea Economist at Société Générale. Our moderator will be Dr. Jang-Yuk Lee from Korea University Business School. After a Q&A session, we will end up the event with a presentation of the YESFEZ by Mr. Bong. I would like to thank in advance all our speakers, as probably never an economic forecast, considering this exceptional situation, has been a challenging exercise. But now, I'm very glad to give not the floor, but the mic to the Deputy Commissioner of the YESFEZ. Thank you.
My name is Hyun-Do. I serve as Deputy Commissioner of the Yellow Sea Free Economic Zone Authority in Gyeonggi Province. Actually, next month, we have planned to change our name from Yellow Sea Free Economic Zone to Gyeonggi Economic Zone Authority. It's truly a pleasure to meet you all of you through these yearly events. As you know, pandemic COVID-19 impacts have never been seen in all the countries. Every citizen has been under severe painful situations, and we are fronting the challenges to get through, and we need to cooperate together and collect our wisdoms. Through these events, economic forecast after COVID-19, I hope we will get insights what we should do to fight the challenges presented by COVID-19. I would like especially to offer my regards to Mr. David-Pierre JALICON, Chairman of KACCCI, His Excellency Philippe LEFORT, Ambassador of France in Korea, Mr. Dae-Joong, Director, Minister of Economic and Finance, and Mr. Michel, Head of Economic Department, French Embassy in Korea, Mr. Suktae, Chief Korea Economist, Société Générale. I'd like to roughly explain YESFEZ. The Yellow Sea Free Economic Zone consists of 3 regional districts, Siung, Baekot, and Pyeongtaek, Poseung, and Hyun-Do. The Siung, Baekot district, cooperating with Seoul National University, we are focusing on unmanned future mobility industry and a medical bio research center. The Poseung district around Pyeongtaek Port, we are fostering automotive-related industries and logistics industries. And we are creating an innovative ecosystem for research, demonstrations, manufacturing, and logistics, as well as a new residential environment and more. More specific and detailed contents, Mr. Han, project manager, will explain you. Finally, I hope that today's economic forum of KFCCI and investment presentation of Yellow Sea Free Economic Zone Authority will be a beneficial place for companies in both countries to find right directions and new business chances. And also, we will continue to work together with the Korea-France Chamber of Commerce in the future and do our best to overcome the Corona-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kang, for introduction of YESFEZ. And so we will start today's presentation. You will have 4 different presentations which will cover different aspects, especially how to do the business and also live with the pandemic situation. I think we have a quite interesting angle. First of all, you will see the coverage from the Ministry of Finance, and Mr. Dae-Joong will deliver the view and plan of Korean government how to cope with this very severe situation, especially having the short-term recovery plan as well as long-term strategy. Mr. Dae-Joong, who is Department of Finance Bureau at the Ministry of Finance and Economy.
Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. And my name is Dae-Joong Lee, and I'm a director for the Development Finance Bureau of the Korean Ministry of Economy and Finance. Actually, Mr. Park Il-young was sitting here until a few minutes ago, but I think he has a other urgent duty to to call upon. So I'm speaking on behalf of himself. It is my pleasure to meet you, even though only virtually due to the current pandemic. Also, I would like to appreciate the Mr. David-Pierre and the FKCCI for hosting this event. As you may know, the Korean government introduced the Korean New Deal in July. Today, I will be explaining the details of a comprehensive plan of a Korean New Deal. My presentation will be in the following order: background, overview, and the focus area. First, let's look at the background of the Korean version of New Deal. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Korean economy is also facing 2 major challenges. One is to recover from the economic recession, and 2 is addressing the structural changes of economy. As the numbers of new cases continue to surge, the fear over the COVID-19 added uncertainty globally. And as a result, the world economy is now faced with a recession that the world has not ever seen. At the same time, as the pandemic restricts the movement of the people across the border, global trade has also plunged significantly. The Korean economy was not immune to the impact of the pandemic. We are also faced with the economic crisis, falling consumption, shock to the employment, and slowed export. Amid such a difficulty, the Korean government has responded with the crisis with a 277 trillion won, which is about 240 billion US dollar to support measure. And this strong measure, we believe, has been the reason why the Korean economy is strong, among the least among the G20 country in the current economic crisis. The Korean government is recognizing the need to be prepared for the changes that will be seen in the economic and the social changes. The increase in non-contact activity since the pandemic has accelerated changes toward the digital economy. Also, the stronger consensus on urgency for climate action has led to the growing demand for the green transition, including adoption of low carbon and the eco-friendly policies. The structural transition has also changed the types of job, raising concern that the growing mismatch between the labor and job may lead to the unemployment and the polarization. And as a result of COVID-19, exacerbating labor condition, the demand for the stronger social security system is also growing. We need to anticipate the future after COVID-19 and outperform the past achievement through the quick reform, thereby making the leap toward the faster the growth path. Korean New Deal has introduced in this context to drive the recovery from the current crisis and to set the national development strategy for Korea to be prepared for the post-COVID-19 era. Now I'll be doing the overview of the Korean New Deal, which aims to transform the Korea into the country that is suitable, innovative, and inclusive. The Korean New Deal is made up with the two main policies. The first is the Digital New Deal, and second is the Green New Deal, both of which are based on the strong employment and the robust social safety net. Fiscal support will be the main means of support. In addition, using the government investment will be the use as a priming the water to mobilize private investment and stimulate the great transformation of country, of economy and society. Now I'll be explaining the key project of each of the three themes: Digital New Deal, Green New Deal, and stronger social safety net. First, on the Digital New Deal, with investment of the 58 trillion won, which is about $50 billion, we aim to incorporate the digital component, the national economy, and the people's everyday life, creating the 900,000 jobs along the way. The first focus of the Digital New Deal is stronger integration of DNA through the economy. And we call DNA as referred to data, network, and AI. The data ecosystem, which involves the collection, utilization, disclosure, integration, and distribution of data will be reinforced. In addition to expanding the integration of 5Gs and AI into the industry, the government will also be innovating into a smarter government with the use of 5G and AI. At the same time, the cybersecurity will be enhanced to reduce the risk of the fuel utilization of the DNA. Second focus area of the Digital New Deal is the digitalization of educational infrastructure. We'll be providing the full coverage of high-speed classroom Wi-Fi to all elementary, middle, and high school across the country. In addition to online education platform of university and job training institution, will be upgraded to provide the higher quality of education and training. Next focus area of the Digital New Deal is to fostering the untech industry. First, we'll be building 18 smart hospitals establishing an industry for the smart medical service. In addition to support will be provided to small and medium-sized enterprise to allow employees at the SME to work without the physical contact with one another. At the same time, we'll be providing 320,000 online micro business to help them find a new market and introduce a smart component to 100,000 store and 10,000 workshop of small size. The last focus of the Digital New Deal is to make the SOC, social infrastructure, safer, smarter, and more convenient. The management system of the national infrastructure, such as the road, railroad, harbor, will be digitalized. Cities and industrial space will be also digitalized into the smart city, smart industrial complex, and the smart logistic distribution system will be built for the higher efficiency. We believe that this will set the foundation for the new industries such as a self-driving vehicle and the drone. Next, we'll look at the Green New Deal at the total of 73 trillion won, which is about $60 billion will be invested by 2025 to enhance quality of life of people and to support the ecosystem of a green industry. With the Korean Green New Deal, we plan to join the international effort to achieve the zero carbon emission by year 2050. In this process, we will aiming at to create the additional 660,000 new jobs in the Korean economy. The first focus of a Green New Deal is a green transition of infrastructure. We plan to turn the public facility into the zero energy building, starting with the green remodeling of 200,000 old public buildings, by supporting the smart and the green transition of 25 regions, and by creating the more green space in urban area, we plan to restore the terrestrial ecosystem. In addition, we also make the smart water management system through the use of AI for the preservation and also the provision of the clean and the safe water. Next focus area is expansion of low carbon and the decentralized energy supply. We will transform the country into the low carbon, eco-friendly country by expanding the supply of renewable energy, while also building the advanced system for smart meter for efficient management of energy. In addition, we will implement a green mobility project by supplying the 1.13 million electric and the 0.2 million hydrogen vehicle, and supporting the scrappage of 1.2 million old diesel car. And the third focus area of Green New Deal is building the ecosystem of a green industry. We will be building the 6 green integrated cluster in the leading area, such as the biomaterials industry, as well as the 10 smart green industrial complex. At the same time, 100 smart ecological plant and the 1,750 clean factory that reduce the pollution will also be established. In support of such innovation in the green industry, research and development of the green technology and provision of adventurous capital will also be supported. Lastly, I'd like to look at the policy that overarch the first 2 components of the Korean New Deal. And to strengthen safety, the total of $24 billion will be injected with the aim to create an additional 340,000 jobs. First, in terms of a stronger employment safety net, we recognize a greater shock on the vulnerable group during the time of crisis. The government plans to expand the employment insurance ecosystem in phase in widened coverage from the 13 million to currently to the 21 million by year 2025. We will also introduce employment support program next January to allow the low-income group to focus on their job search without concerning about their the basic livelihood. In addition to the strong employment safety net, a stronger social safety net is also important. The eligibility criteria for the basic livelihood security benefit will be relaxed in phase in next 2 years, and also study on pilot project on the invalidity of benefit will also be conducted. Next is investment on the human resource. We aim to train the 100,000 individuals for AI and software and 20,000 individuals for the green integrated field. At the same time, we will build the ultra high-speed internet in the 1,200 rural villages, including the island and also the remote area, to make sure that no one is left behind in this great transformation of digitalization. Finally, through the Korean New Deal, we are envision that Korea will turn into the smarter, greener, and the safer country. Thank you for the listening, and I'll hope to come back for the more Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. So we will have another view about the Korean economy from the French embassy. Michel with Head of Economic Department from the French embassy covered the Korean economic perspectives for the second half, which is remaining, and the next year, 2021. Please go, Michel.
Merci, Jong-Yuk. First of all, I would like to thank the FKCCI for its invitation. I will have a few slides to present to you with the simple objective to give you a few facts and figures about Korean economy and prospects for your reference. So my first slide, if it goes well, okay. The first slide compares actually current estimates of Korean GDP from 4 institutions: Bank of Korea, OECD, IMF, and KDI, Korean Development Institute, for both 2020 and 2021. Both Bank of Korea and OECD having alternative scenarios actually in case of a second wave or no wave. As you can see in this bar, the range of estimates are now quite narrowing for 2020. It's quite logical. We are 4 months up to the end of the year. And in a narrow range around -1%, to make it simple, with the exception of IMF, which is still about 2%, -2%. But we have to mention that IMF forecast is from June, whereas the other three forecasts are more recent. So Korea, as we know, will face this year a moderate recession. GDP is expected to bounce up by +3% next year, here too, to make it simple, and this is the gray bar. The impact of another large epidemic wave, the so-called second wave, this would be an additional 1% at least, both this year and next year on GDP growth. But I think we can say that it could be that we have a third scenario, which is one of several consecutive smaller spikes instead of a single massive second wave. And this would certainly put the Korean economy under stress as well. Is just a comparison. If we look at the previous global crisis, the Asian crisis and the global financial crisis, I think it's interesting to see that the rebound in the year following the recession was then very strong, +11% in 1999, +7% in 2010. And it will probably not be the case this time. The graph just below is supposed to illustrate the famous V shape, and the fact that the V may not be as sharp as it was in the previous crisis, or it may even not be a V. I don't know exactly what letter it could be, but anyway, Korea would recover the pre-crisis level next year in 2021 in GDP terms if things go well. Then I have a comparison between a few Asian countries, and I would like just to draw your attention to the right part of the graph, where you will see that alongside Korea, some Asian countries are doing quite well in mitigating the economic impact of the crisis. Positive growth expected in China, positive growth expected in Korea. China is the first trading partner of Korea. Vietnam is the third one. And somehow moderate impact for ASEAN 5 as a whole. So once again, these countries are important trading partners of Korea, and it's also a factor of resilience for the Korean economy. Then the next one is about you compared with OECD country and Eurozone countries, but this has already been mentioned, so I will not elaborate on that. But Korea will quite probably be the least affected country in OECD in 2020. Then next, we'll have a look at traditional growth engines of Korea. Actually, only two remain positive or are forecast to remain positive this year, namely investment and public spending. This is not a surprise for public spending, which did already sustain growth last year, and this year even more. But this is more surprising in the case of investment. It means that Korean companies have continued to invest quite significantly this year. Actually, we must remember that it comes after 2 years of slowdown in investment from companies in 2018 and 2019. So there is here a cyclical effect, which is mainly to be attributed to the IT sector. All segments of growth are more or less expected to turn to positive territory next year, except for construction, where the perspective remains, well, let's say, pretty unclear. Then next slide is a quick outlook by sectors. So the colors that you have here are very, very emphatic. But I think still it's interesting to know that for 2020, semiconductors and banking sector are the more resilient, bearing in mind that other subsectors are doing quite well, like e-commerce or digital services. For 2021, again, banking, semiconductors, in a way, shipbuilding are expected to post better performance. But unfortunately, it's not the case in some other sectors like tourism, and especially international tourism, and also in retail and related services, expected again online services, where recovery will probably take longer. Then in the next slide, I would like to at exports, because it's an important sector for Korea. First of all, and this is a blue graph, you will see that the fall of, and we should remind actually that the fall of Korean exports has started in the last months of 2018, at that time mainly due to the semiconductors industry, and after a very good year 2018. So actually it's quite a long period of decline, 2 years, which will continue until the end of this year before a rise next year in 2021, expected in the range of plus 10% for Korean exports. By sectors, cars and steel suffered most this year. Semiconductors are steady and could most probably lead the growth next year, here too due to the cyclical effect that I mentioned just before. I would like also to remind that chips count for about 20% of Korean exports and is one of the key export community of Korea. I will maybe very quickly address the next slide, which, yes, a few graphs here. Just a few comments. You have on the left business and consumer sentiment. So it's very obvious that business and consumer sentiment in Korea was clearly up from April, May this year. But of course, the evolution remains to be seen after the strengthening of sanitary measures in September. Second comment about this graph, that sentiment of business and especially of SMEs was already pretty low before the crisis. And lastly, this is a graph on the right. You will see the rate of capacity utilization in industry and manufacturing industry, which remain pretty high, with the exception, once again, of April, March this year. So we are in the range now, again, around 70% of capacity utilization. We have mentioned the public debt, at least public spending. So I would like to show a few figures regarding debt in Korea. Public debt is growing quickly since 2018, and even more this year, due to the massive plans to support economic activity, but it remains largely manageable at 43% of GDP at the end of this year as projection. The graph will show you this trend. We should keep in mind that actually private debt is much higher than public debt in Korea, but growing as fast as public debt. You will see the forecast of inflation. I will not come back on that because I think time is nearly at the limit for me. Unemployment, 3.1% end of August. There is no big wave of unemployment so far, but employment rate, is going down, especially for the young population. And this gives me the transition for my last graph, where last slide, where to remind that beyond the current crisis, Korea faces serious structural challenges with a rapidly aging population, fertility rate hitting a new record low in 2019, and labor productivity, especially in the service sector, still being below OECD average. All that leads to a fall of potential growth. So I will end my presentation of this slide, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michel. So thank you for your view about Korean economy and what's going to come in coming months and after next year. And then our economy is also part of global economy. So now is the time to look at over global economic perspective outlook from the chief Korean economist, Suktae.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's my pleasure to give the ST outlook of the global economy in this event. Frankly speaking, we all know that at least in this year, maybe next year, even a bit beyond, the global economic outlook should be determined by the COVID-19, the coronavirus stuff to whatever, not by ourselves. That's the destiny. So let me rather focus on the current situation, especially the nascent signs of recovery in the global economy, despite the continued pandemic situation in terms of the COVID-19. So, these two graphs, maybe you are familiar with this. The right-hand side chart is the so-called the confirmed cases. Left-hand side chart is the death. Currently, the number of total confirmed cases globally is near 30 million, and the death toll is around 900,000. And the pace of increase in these two numbers is basically not that stabilized yet. So if you just extrapolate this trend, you will end up with a quite famous quote by the Bill Gates. The COVID-19 will be over maybe at the end of next year, and until then, maybe we would have millions more deaths, and probably the number of these total confirmed cases would exceed probably 100 million. And that's not a overly pessimistic. And in some senses, we are all accustomed to this kind of situation. So people gradually think that this COVID-19 situation would last at least 1 more year and maybe longer. And people are already accustomed themselves to, those kind of situations. So next slide, consensus of the so-called health expert in terms of the, maybe when the vaccine would be available. The median is, again, the end of next year. Of course, some people hope that we could see the vaccine within this year, but many people, especially the health experts, are against that idea. And maybe the real question, of course, the first one is when this pandemic ends or when the vaccine is available. But equally and probably even the more important question is what would happen if the pandemic is controlled, if the vaccine is available. At least in the cases of so-called Spanish flu, 100 years ago, the first global pandemic, of course, there's no, the things that, history would not repeat itself. I think there's no sense in that the history would repeat itself, but at least 100 years ago, as soon as the pandemic ends, actually stock price starts to decline. So, that is actually quite, enormous uncertainty what will happen if the pandemic is over. But anyway, let me pass you the next slide. So this is the graph of the adjustment and the people's expectation on the global outlook. And I would say that there are 3 groups. First one, maybe the left-handmost the part is the so-called the developed countries, the US, Euro area, lots of European countries. Their economic outlook is already very much hurt by this, pandemic. And the middle side, the Asian countries like China, Japan, Australia, South Korea, Taiwan, those Asia Pacific countries are least affected by this coronavirus. While in the right-hand side, you can see the India, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, those emerging market countries are most seriously affected by the coronavirus. We are all familiar with the situation. So, the next slide. The next few slides, I would give you how the recovery works at this moment. First thing, consumption recovery is pretty impressive and it is really a V. How this can happen and why we believe the short-term outlook in the consumption is good, that's basically because of the higher savings that you can see in the right-hand side chart. The gray bar is the savings rate last year, and the red bar is the savings rate second quarter this year, in the middle of the pandemic. What you can see is the savings rate of the household, at least in the developed countries, actually surged because of various government support and the fact that they did not spend because of lockdown situation. So at least in the short term, we could say that people has enough money to spend. So of course, this pandemic situation is not over, but at least we are accustomed to this situation and lockdown is no longer feasible in some senses. That's also the consensus. So as long as they have money, they will spend. So at least in the short term, maybe until the end of this year, consumption outlook of those developed countries should be pretty good. And for investment side and trade, investment is surprisingly healthy, maybe because of the, there's lots of, the impact of this pandemic onto the countries, industries, actually it's very, different among various, industries. For example, lots of high-tech companies, they are getting benefit from this lockdown pandemic situation. So the stock price of so-called FANG or whatever and this Nasdaq market continue to rise. So that seems to trigger at least some part of the investment. And also, I would say that, again, businesses are also getting used to this kind of situation. Anyway, the life goes on, the companies should continue to earn money, and they need at least some sort of, some amount of investment. And the trade is recovering. Also, it could be a V-shape, even though, frankly speaking, we are not that sure about the outlook for mid to long term, maybe probably into the next year. So for the policy side, we have to say that the monetary policy, the central banks almost fully utilize their ammunition. So there's not enough ammunition left for the monetary policy. So if situation gets worse, maybe the only hope should be fiscal policy. Of course, fiscal policy is also implemented vastly. So maybe you may heard about the so-called MMT or modern monetary theory, which effectively means that government should spend the money and the financing should be done by central bank, basically printing the money. So, in the usual situation, this sounds crazy, but the situation right now is so exceptional. Many, policymakers, central bankers, and the market implicitly agreed that if situation gets worse, that kind of monetary financing of fiscal spending should be implemented. It's already implemented, and it should continue further. And this is the story of so-called the average inflation targeting. So the US Fed last month says that from now on, they would target on the average inflation, and to the market participants, including ourselves, that effectively means that the Fed would not normalize their policy or tighten their money supply at least for about several years, 5 years, or in the considered period. So at least in the financial market, people assume that maybe within a considerable future, there will be no tightening of the central bank policy. And for the inflation side, I already told you that the greatest uncertainty is on what would happen after this pandemic ends. And the typical argument is that when the economy is normalized, maybe the vast wind of inflation would come into us. So why? Naturally, as I mentioned, the central bank print money to support the fiscal spending. So after the economy is normalized, that money should turn into a inflation. So that's perfectly correct in terms of the traditional economics, but the problem is that people are not so confident on this logic of the traditional monetary economics. But anyway, as the money supply rise like crazy, people naturally expect more inflation, and that is reflected in the financial market in terms of the rise in the the inflation expectation in the financial market, as well as the decline in so-called the real interest rate using that market-based inflation expectation. So the biggest question in the financial market now is whether inflation would emerge after this pandemic ends. That's the so-called really $1 million question, and nobody knows the answer for right now. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oh. I hope that to find someone who has already passed through that way and then show us the right way to go, especially through like the international collaboration. So this time, Mr. Ambassador Philippe LEFORT from our French Embassy, he will welcome the audience and also share own warm regards as well as his own view about the current situation. Let's send the microphone to Ambassador Philippe LEFORT.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I had a bit of difficulties to join the meeting. I hope that I'll be able to share my PowerPoint. Yes, well, first I would like to thank you very much for your kind invitation. This is a regular and popular event, FKCCI, and it is particularly important today, even if forecasting under the present circumstances is particularly arduous and therefore all the more expected. Well, Mr. DROBNIAK has said the essential of what I wanted to say, so I'm going to be very brief to this presentation related to what's going on in Korea currently. Well, as you say, as everybody has said, Korea has been remarkably resilient during this past months, and after being among the first countries to be affected by the pandemic, the Korean government has demonstrated a remarkable capacity to contain the spread of the virus without damaging the economy too severely. Therefore, we have seen well, the rank of Korea in terms of nominal GDP raising pretty much. The nominal GDP of Korea now ranks the 9th in 2020, outpacing Canada, Russia, and Brazil. And Korea will be certainly one of the countries that will suffer the less among the main economies in the world of the current crisis. Of course, we don't know whether the recent uptick in the number of COVID cases and the social distancing measures will have an impact on this recovery. But we hope that this good trend is going to pursue. I must add that Korea, we must be attentive also of the excellent efforts of research led in Korea, together with many other countries, including France, to find a therapy to coronavirus. I hope, and I think actually, that Korea will be also part of the solution. My main purpose was to draw your kind attention to our current relaunch economic plan, which is called in French France Relance, will be translated by Plan sous Wibok, probably in Korean, which will be more than 100 billion euros for 2022. All over the world, governments are acting to mitigate the effects of the crisis and trying to shape the post-COVID world. And from this point of view, this plan in France is very close, has a lot of similarities with the Korean New Deal, which has been developed and showed by the representative of the Ministry of Economy and Finance, representing Mr. Park, a little bit earlier. I would like to highlight some of those similarities of this plan with the French recovery plan, which was released on September the 3rd. This is, once again, 1 billion euros for the next 2 years. It is historically large and ambition, being 4 times bigger than the 2008 French recovery plan. It aims at reaching the pre-crisis economic level by 2022 through 3 main channels. And we'll see, therefore, the similarities with the Korean plan. First, by boosting investment, enhancing the French industrial competitiveness and innovation. Second, by developing social and regional cohesion with employment projects and skill training for the youth. Finally, by advancing into the ecological transition, from promoting circular economy to investing into energy efficiency for homes and public buildings, and developing decarbonated industries such as green hydrogen. As you may have noticed, the French and the Korean plan share similar objectives, developing more competitive and innovative industries while favoring a greener economy and ensuring more inclusive growth. I would like to draw your attention to the opportunities that the French plan is representing for potential Korean investment, particularly in those fields. Let me formulate the wish that these commonalities may pave the way for a greater cooperation between our 2 countries, for example, in fields like energy, healthcare, and mobility. And I thank you for your attention.
To listen to the local government strategy, especially from Gyeonggi province, how to attract the foreign direct investment in the era of COVID. Mr. Han?
Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Han Sang-Bong, and I am project manager with the Yellow Economic Zone Authority. Right now, the COVID-19 crisis is like a war situation. This is very different from the previous situation caused by competition. The virus is a real threat. I think that it is even more difficult because it is involved in macroeconomic uncertainty. Many people talk about the wartime CEO leadership and the ordinary CEO leadership during the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't know which CEO leadership is better. After pandemic, the question is how do you find the business opportunity and overcome the crisis? I think that is a key factor. Also, I hope you can discover some good business opportunity today. You really need to invest Yellow Sea Free Economic Zone the following regions. First, we are creating R&D complex for new future industry. Secondly, we have a cluster of high-tech industry. It is easy to find a business chance. And third, you can save the logistic costs through the broader transportation networks. Finally, you can easily reach your main customer in Gyeonggi province. This is a Korea economic new map, and you've been seen several times. In the plan, Yellow Sea Economic Belt, which focuses on the high-tech industry and logistics, the Yellow Sea Free Economic Zone is carrying out the development project. We are developing district in the city of Pyeongtaek and Seoul in the Gyeonggi province. Our vision is creating an international business platform. So our goals are to foster knowledge-based high-tech industry, to develop value-added logistics at Pyeongtaek Port, and then to create a residential environment for the talent companies. As a major strategy, R&D for future growth industry and R&BD in the Baeguk district of Seoul are being fostered. Also, mass production of developed key technology and the product is being carried out in the Pyeongtaek area. YESFEZ is located in the central region of Korea on the west coast and neighboring the Korean capital region. Within 1.5 hours and drive of YESFEZ, you can find many industry clusters, including global cooperation. Traffic networks such as the highway, railroad, and subway lines are expanding. To sum up, it takes about 40 minutes to travel from Yeouido in Seoul to Pyeongtaek city by subway. The expansion of various traffic networks will be completed by 2022. In addition, Pyeongtaek will continue to experience population growth due to the huge investment made by Samsung and LG. Pyeongtaek Port, the core infrastructure of our development zone, has an excellent inland transportation environment. It can be accessed quickly from major cities and Korea. In particular, it has been ranked #1 in the automobile trade volume for 9 years. Let me introduce the surrounding industrial environment of YESFEZ. There are about 70,814 invested companies operating in Korea. Of that number, approximately 3,714 invested companies are located in our province. You can invest and do business in our developing area for your business success for Asia market. Automotive OEM companies such as Hyundai, Kia, SsangYong are located near our development zone. Also, 1,400 major auto part companies are concentrated around our developing area, which is accounted for 41% of production density in Korea. In particular, Hyundai MOEF decided to invest our developing district for EV module last month. The semiconductor and display industry are connected with the city of Hwaseong, Hyun, Suwon, Incheon, Yongin, and Pyeongtaek. It accounts for 40–70%. In Korea, large-scale investment by global companies such as Samsung and LG are on the way in Pyeongtaek. Hynix is creating a semiconductor cluster in Yongin. The integration of a semiconductor equipment, parts, and material companies is advantageous for new semiconductor initiatives. Pyeongtaek Port has a well-organized ecosystem of automobile, electronics, and material industry in the Korean Sakal region. Now, logistic companies are investing in cold chain and automobile logistic area. Next is our development district, Pyeongtaek BIGS. BIGS development project is taking place on site of approximately 208 hectares. The construction of the site was completed last December. The automobile, electronic, electricity, chemical, machinery, and logistic industry can now move in. Mega project nearby Pyeongtaek, Godok, and Yongin Hynix are on the way. I think that it is either time to find a business chance. Second is the Seoul National University Siheung campus, Baego district. Baego district is located within Baego New City and Siheung. Seoul National University, Siheung campus and hospital will be integrated. It will be developed as an R&D complex for global future new growth industry. To foster future new growth industry that result in super intelligence, hyperconnectivity, and convergence, we will focus on the research on land, sea, and air unmanned vehicles, and we will create an ecosystem that links a demonstration center. In addition, we will create a global medical complex for medical device and dental science. The development concept of the Baego district in Siheung focus on a global industrial academic cooperation complex, and second, startup complex, and also medical complex, finally an education and training center for the experts. There are several key facilities in the Baego district. Intelligent unmanned mobile lab will be completed in October this year. Self-driving future mobility center will be completed last month, and then Dae shipbuilding, marine engineering test water tanker that was completed last year. There are also faculty accommodation and the educational center. Seoul University and the public institution, including Seoul National University, as well as about 55 companies, including Samsung Electronics, Hyundai Motor, and Daewoo Shipbuilding, and Marine Engineer are participating. And also Seoul National University Hospital with 800 beds will be built. There are several good points for the investor. The Pyeongtaek sales price has a comparative advantage over other areas. Clusters such as the semiconductor and the automobile, which are important across the engine industry, have been formed. We are going to be able to realize future growth industry, future R&D, demonstration center, and large investment are on the way. The Pyeongtaek port is a logistic hub for the Chinese market. We will give a tax break such as the acquisition and the property tax exemption. And also, in particular, the Yellow Sea Free Economic Zone Authority has designated a project manager for each project. We will provide all administration service for your investment project. For more detail about the specific special economic zone in Gyeonggi province, you can contact us by email or phone, and it would be our pleasure to provide you with investment consultation. We don't have to die from the virus shock. However, our way of life, our way of business will change. I think knowing how to change is our biggest challenge. Now we are at the darkest point we've done. Gyeonggi province will help you through your difficulty and achieve investment success. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Han. It was very interesting to have a look at your contact and especially the new district in the area. I think we will get a lot of not only production-related issues as well as innovation, research development, mainly some health and other facilities will be, I think, based in the new Eco area in Seoul City. So thanks so much for all 4 presenters. Now it's time to have some Q&A session. Among the audience, if you have any question, please feel free to put your question on your chat box, and then I will try to deliver your question to one of the presenters. Please nominate the person who would like to answer your question. For the moment, I have a couple of questions already pre-registered. So first question goes to Mr. Lee Moon-young from Ministry of Finance and Economy. Mr. Lee, are you there?
Yes, I am. Please go ahead.
Okay, yes. First question is about the public aid, mainly government subsidy to individuals as well as small and medium-sized corporations and as well as big companies. Especially the question was delivered that most of current subsidy will be in a way ended by the end of September, unless there's a new plan for coming months. Especially, is there any specific plan for the sector such as tourism, hotel, and tourism industry? As Michel DROBNIAK mentioned, that this industry is in a very, very tough difficulty for this year as well as for next year.
Well, thank you for the question. And we have prepared various measures such as liquidity support and also the various exemption program as well as employment stability support for hotel and tourism industry, and as well as other sectors affected by the pandemic. And as for the liquidity, we used the Tourism Promotion and Development Fund to provide it about 100 billion won as a special loan for without any collateral, and expand the general loan for the suspend repayment of obligation to help to alleviate the cost burden of company affected by the pandemic. We prepared the taxation support, such as extending the deadline for the paying the tax, also deferring payment what has been already been due. For the especially for tourism industry, rental costs and other charges has been reduced and waived. In terms of employment support, the aviation and the tourism industry has been designated as a sector for the special employment support to help stabilize the employment. As the pandemic continued to impact the economy, the government plans to expand the part of the support measure and to introduce additional measure. The hotel and tourism industry has been initially designated as a sector for special employment support until this September, but this will be extended another 6 months until the next March 31st. The employment maintenance subsidy has been provided to this sector, has been extended for another 2 months. And now we are working on the 4th supplementary budget, which has been recently submitted to the National Assembly for approval, including additional measure, including the special credit line and also the support for the SME in the tourism industry.
Thank you for your clear explanation. And there's another question also is delivered to Mr. Im Moon-young. It's about the participation possibility for French company related to Korean New Deal plan. Do you think that the French companies will have equal opportunity to be selected in case that there's any kind of a chance to work on the Korean New Deal plan?
Well, thank you very much for the interest and also the express participation for the Korean New Deal. The Korean New Deal aimed to transfer the Korea from the what we call the fast follower to the also the first learner and first pacer, and as a carbon dependent economy to the low carbon economy, and also from the socially divided country with a more inclusive society and the nation. By 2025, total of 160 trillion won will be invested in the Digital New Deal and the Green New Deal, and the 2 pillars of the Green New Deal, with an overarching policy to strengthen the safety net. In this process, we expect to create another 1.9 million jobs. And you have asked the collaboration. Of course, we are trying to announce, because this is not only the area which is interest and the important pillar for the Korean economy, but also the globally, because what we face as a Korea economy is very much similar to what other countries are concerning right now. So as for the private investment and also cooperation with the private sector, including the French industry, are the key for the success of a Korean New Deal, and we welcome and we wish to the further discussion and collaboration on the participation of interested French company in the future.
Wow, that's very interesting. I have another one question to Michel DROBNIAK about the sovereign rating of Korea. So South Korea is well known to be very sound fundamental, low public debt, and as well as a high foreign reserve. And also the economy has kept the inflation rate quite low. And do you think that this COVID pandemic will affect the sovereign rating of South Korea?
Thank you. It's also a good question. Well, I think the rating of Korea is pretty much going up than rather going down through the crisis, because as every presenter said before, actually Korea is very resilient to the crisis. So yes, there will be quite probably higher inflation in the times to come. Mr. O has mentioned the prospect about inflation worldwide, but it will affect also Korea. Yes, there may be high inflation. There may be also, and there is already higher public debt, but this is at very manageable level from a macroeconomic point of view. The reserves of Korea are still very large, and Korea can face such a crisis from the macroeconomic point of view without, in my opinion, being affected in its sovereign rating.
Thank you. So many people said that even though there's a dispute in a newspaper that some people argued that sovereign rating of South Korea would be in danger or harmful in the case of because of public debt rate goes up. So your expectation would readily goes up because it is a much more relative. So now the sovereign rating of South Korea is better than higher than that of Japan. So we could expect that at least to keep that distance even a little bit better than the expectation. So there's one more question related to labor market, which is addressed to Mr. Dae-Joong Lee from Ministry of Finance. So the New Deal is expected to result in almost 2 million job creation. And our labor market reforms plan to favor creating employment in these associate sectors and others. That means these sectors means that those sectors addressed by Korean New Deal. So to digital, and second part is about related green. And those jobs that you have mentioned, around 1.9 million jobs will be created, will be mainly created in these two sectors, as you mentioned.
Okay, well, through the Korean New Deal, we expect to directly or indirectly create a 1.9 million job by year 2025. So number is not single year, it's not on the direct number, but also the some of the spillover to the related industry as well. This number includes not only the job created directly through the fiscal investment of the government, but also the quality of job in the private sector by increasing private investment and innovation to create the new industry and business opportunity. Because of the reform of relevant acts and system would be essential in the process, the government has established a task force with the Democratic Party, which is ruling party, and as well as an expert from the private sector to work on the legislation and also the institutional framework for the Korean New Deal. And their discussion this month will be in the order of the green and the more digital and also the safer in the safer and resilient the safety net for the Korean economy in the future.
Thank you. But Korean government have announced those two directions, like digital and green, which are very close to also European Union have announced their recovery plan in which that to focus on two areas. One is digital and the second one is climate. Climate is related to green. And as well, European Council announced that it will reach like a zero carbon, like a carbon neutrality by year 2025. And Mr. O, what do you think that to having fixing this kind of very firm objective under quite uncertain pandemic era, like the EU Council has announced very firmly to reach like a carbon neutrality by 2025. However, Korean government announced like a Green New Deal, but it hasn't shown exact objective. What kind of approach would be much more adaptable at the current situation?
So I have to admit that maybe there's a quite a considerable gap or difference in the perception of this the climate the global warming or maybe this kind of the crisis regarding the climate problem between the EU and Korea. The European Union is, of course, I believe that maybe they're most sensitive on this issue. While for Korea, frankly speaking, still the Korean people are more geared on the economic growth and more geared on the efficiency in maybe the narrow senses. So that's the reality. So that's the reason why the Korean government are not showing an exact or detailed time plan and on this, the green issues. But I believe that maybe it'll take some time. But I believe that this kind of pandemic situation would help to, educate the Korean people why it is, the climate issue, environment issue is important. So, in the short term, I'm also personally a bit disappointed with this kind of, the lack of a very detailed plan about this, the carbon zero, whatever. But I believe that maybe 5 years later, 10 years later, things will be improved. Of course, I know that, some people are really yelling, but at least I believe that this year, next year, and as time goes by, the Korean people will be educated and things would be very different maybe next year and the year after.
Okay, thank you so much. So now, for the last almost 1 hour, we have had a view from 4 experts covering to introduce how the Korean government cope with or uncertainty until this pandemic era. And then we had a view from Mr. Michel DROBNIAK, how Korean economy stands quite strong against, even though there's a very tough and hot waters. And also we have had a view from a global perspective from Mr. Suktae from Société Générale. And then also we have seen the charm and interesting incentives to settle down in Gyeonggi province, especially in Siheung and Suktae area for foreign investors. Thank you so much for all presentation, especially Mr. Dae-Joong from the Ministry of Finance located in Dae-Joong City, and Mr. Ambassador Philippe LEFORT. So thank you so much for the audience to stay tuned with us for sharing information and sharing experience in the era of uncertainty of pandemic of COVID-19. So let's give the word to Mr. David-Pierre JALICON to conclude today's event.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, and thank you to all the participants, all the panelists, whether they are here with us or online. Thank you to the large audience with us today. I go through all the presentation and the Q&A session. We have learned not only more data about the situation, but as well, in some way, matter of hope, thanks to the very ambitious relaunch plan from our both country. I was glad to hear that there's as well, there will be opportunity of cooperation. Be sure that the FKCCI, we will continue to monitor the situation and continue to inform you and try to find, as usual, good opportunity of cooperation between our two countries, between our member, between all our company. We will have soon a new event with various format, depending the situation, we'll adapt to ourselves, and be sure that at the FKCCI, as I'm sure all of you, we keep the fighting spirit very high, and we are moving forward all together to better day. Thank you again, and see you soon.